lives, we've had a passionate love affair with fiction. Ever since we were young children, we have been intrinsically drawn towards them. I still remember the times my mom and I sat on the sofa surrounded by books we borrowed from the public library. She read hundreds of books to me, and that's how she introduced me to the fascinating world of reading books. One of my favorite books from my childhood was called Harapeka Mushi, The Very Hungry Caterpillar, and 100万回生きた猫, The Cat That Lived a Million Times. I learned to read when I was 3, and when I was 4, I was already reading to my younger sister. Here, I'm reading Hansel and Gretel. Reading has always been a part of my life, like eating and sleeping.
It's the same with me. I also have my mom and dad to thank for my love of reading. My parents are both teachers, and every day when my mum came home from work, she would bring a book home with her from the school library. Just to clarify, she didn't steal them. Over the years, our house had books lying everywhere, in the living room, the kitchen, even the bathrooms. I would like to mention at this point that in our house, no book has ever been subjected to harm or used as emergency toilet paper. I could read on my own by the time I was 2 years old, and the first books I can remember loving were the Magic Key series by Roderick Hunt. I would spend hours and hours poring over them, lost in my own little world. Here, I'm stood in the playground, deeply absorbed in a Winnie the Pooh book, resolutely ignoring the fact that that's a playground, not a reading ground.
Throughout our lives, reading has just been a hobby for us, which we took for granted, and we never really stopped to think about what it actually was that made us love reading fiction, until TEDx came along. Watching TED videos was something we both loved doing, and when our English teacher announced in class that auditions were being held for TEDxYouth Chiang Mai, we immediately looked at each other like this, and telepathically agreed to present a talk together. This is when we really start to think about the benefits of books and how it has made a huge impact on our lives. We were quite nervous about giving a joint talk, as we had never seen one before, but given our shared love of books, it seemed a natural thing to do. To begin, we would like to list just a small fraction of benefits which reading gives you. It extends your vocabulary and grammar, strengthens your brain connections, leading to better memory and expansion of your learning capacities, and it even decreases the chance of getting Alzheimer's. But we think the real appeal of books, fictional books in particular, is the magic and imagination they bring to mankind.
We would now like to read you an excerpt from Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. Please close your eyes as we read, and let the power of words take you on a journey. It was Sunday afternoon. The resting horses nibbled the remaining wisps of hay, and they stamped their feet, and they bit the wood of the mangers and rattled the halter chains. The afternoon sun sliced in through the cracks of the barn walls and lay in bright lines on the hay. There was the buzz of flies in the air, the lazy afternoon humming. From outside came the clang of horseshoes on the playing peg and the shouts of men, playing, encouraging, jeering. But in the barn it was quiet and humming and lazy and warm. In the time it took for me to read you that, you just traveled to a farm in Salinas, California during the Great Depression with the main characters George and Lenny. A good author like Steinbeck can take you anywhere, anytime with anyone, and all you have to do is lift a finger to turn the pages. It may seem impossible, but through reading, you can live many lives in one lifetime. What we've just done is expanded your imagination beyond its normal periphery. Some people might argue that movies also expand your imagination, but if you think about it, movies have visual and oral effects, whereas books only have words, and you have to imagine everything yourself. It makes the overall experience more profound and personal.
From imagination, ideas arise, and ideas have the potential to change the world. As Albert Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited to all we now know and understand, while imagination embraces the entire world and all there ever will be to know and understand. Additionally, with our extremely easy access to different sources of modern technology, All knowledge is at the tip of everyone's fingers, available at a moment's notice. A few decades ago, having a lot of knowledge was seen as being smart. But now, imagination and creativity is more highly valued by society. Everyone can have knowledge, but only some really possess the gift of imagination and creativity. Without them, this TEDx talk wouldn't even exist. A great tragedy, I'm sure you all agree.
Another benefit of reading fiction is that it develops empathy. As you are following the lives of characters in the story, you are drawn into their situations and you feel their emotions. If they lose a loved one due to tragic circumstances, you feel their grief and sorrow.
If they finally welcome their child into a world who was born after several miscarriages, you feel the mother's joy and the father's relief.
If they're hiding in a closet from a vicious serial killer, your heart beats just as fast as theirs does.
And if they're standing at an altar on their wedding day, watching their future spouse walk up an aisle, you smile just as hard as they do.
All of those situations can induce feelings of empathy, which can be transferred to everyday life. This finding also emerged in a study conducted by Emmanuel Castano and PhD candidate David Kidd. They found that people who read fiction find it easier to decipher the emotions of others simply by looking at their eyes. The stereotype surrounding people who read is that we are nerdy hermits who constantly stay cooped up in our houses and read non-stop while refusing to interact with the outside world. But interestingly enough, the evidence suggests that bookworms have the most empathetic minds and are the most adept at socializing and making friends. So what is the natural conclusion from this? It is that society would greatly benefit from having highly empathetic people, as any social problems such as racism, poverty, and sexism could all potentially be reduced.
Not only that, but books have the ability to make us question ourselves and our beliefs. When I read The Fault in Our Stars by John Green, it made me think of something I had never really taken the time to think about before. It made me think about death. Admittedly, it wasn't the nicest thing to think about during my precious summer holiday, but it was something I had never really considered before, and it made me look at the concept of death in an entirely different way. This made me think that when a person reads, they're encountering different situations and concepts, and consequently are subliminally forced to consider various ideas that might have never occurred to them before. People might argue that other forms of media, such as movies, newspapers, and documentaries also do this, but with books, you're more in control of what you imagine. It is entirely immersive. The amount of time we spend with a novel is so much more than what you spend with a movie or a newspaper article. This long exposure to the experience accentuates your thoughts. And with newspapers, they're more objective, so it's less personal, and you aren't really fully involved in the situation. So we think that reading fiction allows us to question ourselves better than other forms of media. And if fiction induces people to be more open to different ideas and issues, don't you think there are immense benefits from being surrounded by original and thoughtful people who are not afraid to question the world around them?
As we continue to investigate our topic, we found that reading rates have been rapidly declining since the 1980s. This led us to connecting the links between the decline in reading and the increase in entertainment-focused technology, both of which took place in the same decade. Personal computers, CDs, Walkmans, and cable television are just a few examples of the things released in the 1980s. These are all very practical and entertaining devices which are still being used today, but doesn't this make you think that technology is a major factor in the decline of reading? Are these other mediums taking away from the never-ending world of fascination and education that fiction provides? And are we, as a society, going to pay a high price for this? It seems clear to us that most people, particularly our generation, are too preoccupied with the world around them to really take the time to sit down and appreciate the experience of reading a book. According to mommyish.com, a parenting website, 1 in 5 teenagers are embarrassed to be seen with a book in public. Both young and old readers are now slowly becoming a dying breed, and it would seem that reading has lost its magic and become a chore. But we truly believe that there is a book out there for everyone, even people who claim to despise reading. As the brilliant J.K. Rowling said, if you don't like to read, then you haven't found the right book.
There are many different ways of reading nowadays. For instance, there are ebooks, which we are all for. We'd rather want people read on their Kindle than not read at all. And it is true that they're cheaper than buying a book in a bookshop, and they're more practical to carry around if you're traveling. And not only that, but there are also audiobooks. Listening to an audiobook in bed before you go to sleep is one of the most calming and relaxing things you can do. But in our opinion, there's just something innately charming and intimate about the feel of a real book in your hands. Books have characters, they have history, they have story behind them, both literally and figuratively. Some books are centuries old and have traveled the world with many different owners who took care not to damage their fragile pages. And some books are brand new with freshly printed pages and have never left the polished shelf of a bookstore they live in.
We have these stacks of binded paper to thank for who we are today, as they've influenced us in so many different ways. They've shaped who we are as people, given us values and morals to live by, taught us countless invaluable lessons which we apply to our everyday lives. Books span centuries, even millennia, bringing ancient and new ideas to the modern day, making them both relatable and accessible. The power they hold in their thin, welcoming pages is almost omnipotent. When you hold a book in your hands, you are holding an entire world. It's up to you what you gain and experience from it. We believe that reading fiction is the first major step towards creating a thriving society full of curious and insightful individuals who will hopefully pass the experience of reading down through generations. But we now come to the most important and pivotal aspect of books, which is the part we love the most.
The smell! Thank you.